We started the Rural Urban Bridge Initiative about 3.5 years ago. We came at it from different places and from different parts of the country, but fundamentally, all of us came at it because what we saw was a persistent and growing divide between red and blue, for sure, but particularly rural people, working class people, and urban people and the professional class. And we wanted to get to the bottom of it. We didn't feel like the left, the Democratic Party, liberals generally really understood it, and we felt like the right was really good at exploiting the difference. So we were trying to figure out how did we get into this mess? And that was the birth of Ruby. Since then, we're still a very small organization, but we work around the country. We provide education and training in understanding the origins of the divide and what we can do about it. We get into public policy through our Rural New Deal and other initiatives. And we have a local community engagement program called Community Works that is now in 6 states and probably soon to be in 10 or 12 states, where we help local Democrats, local left-leaning organizations put aside politics to just engage with community members and begin to rebuild trust by doing things together to fix local problems. So that's some of what Ruby does. And there's plenty more that you can learn by just going to our website, which we encourage you all to do. So I am so thrilled to have my dear friend, colleague, and neighbor, just about 20 minutes away, with us today, Barbara Kingsolver. Barbara is one of those rare people where the idea that she needs no introduction really does apply. I'll just give all of you know her for multiple best-selling and outstanding books, the most recent of which is going to be one of the focal points of our conversation today, Demon Copperhead. But in addition, Barbara and her husband Steve and their two daughters have a small farm in Southwest Virginia, not far from us. And On top of that, their son-in-law runs the first and only butcher shop in the region. So they've sort of spread the wealth in the community. And I'll say that I met Barbara when she was back and forth between Arizona and Southwest Virginia. I don't remember the exact year, but here's how I met her. I was at the farmer's market. At that time, Abingdon's farmer's market was teeny tiny. It was about 7 or 8 of us selling stuff. And some very lovely tall woman came up and bought a bunch of my eggplant. And I was happy for the sale. And then my wife leaned over to me and said, "Do you know who that is?" And I said, "No." And she said, "That's Barbara Kingsolver." So you could sort of say that was the beginning of a beautiful relationship. And we've really been collaborating on all kinds of things in a variety of ways since then. So, Barbara, we're just thrilled to have you here with us today.
Thanks, Anthony. Well, I was just a girl that wanted eggplants. And I still do. I was before we started, I was bemoaning the fact that I still try to grow eggplants and I should just quit because Anthony's are always so much more beautiful. But yeah, I mean, I take our farming seriously. I take my community seriously. I deliver lambs, I castrate lambs. I do this other work because I believe in it and I think it's good for the world and good for me.
Absolutely.
So I shouldn't have led with castration. Sorry about that, guys.
Bad move, Barbara. Jeez.
Sorry.
Well, let's
Sorry.
tell us a little. You started to get hint at your roots a little. Your roots are actually in Appalachian, Kentucky. Then
Mhm.
you were away in Arizona for a number of years, but you came back more than 20 years ago, almost 30. You came back on the other side of the mountains from Kentucky. What brought you back to the region?
Um, I want to say I really never left. I grew up in Kentucky in a really little town, even smaller than the one where I live now. And like many a small town kid, I really wanted to grow up and kick the little town dust off my shoes and see the world. And so, and I was lucky enough to get to do that. I was I got a scholarship. I was able to go away to college. After that, I just went all over the place. I was kind of pretty itinerant for about 5 or 6 years. I don't think my parents knew what country I was in. I moved around getting, the jobs that you can get at that age, poverty wages, but experiencing a lot of kinds of life, different cultures. I lived in Paris, France. I lived in Greece. I ended up going to Tucson, Arizona when I had visa problems. I had to leave Europe, and so I wanted to see the West. And I was just seriously a Rolling Stone, experiencing the world and always missing home. Tucson is kind of where I got stuck because sooner or later, you get the job that's a pretty good job. You get a house, you get a relationship, you kind of get the stone grows some moss. But for all the years I lived in Tucson, and I don't want to, if anybody's watching from Tucson, I love Tucson and I really grew up there living in a border city was such a political education for me, working with the sanctuary movement, all that. But I still missed the mountains and the woods and here's how much I missed it. When my kids were very small, in Tucson, I would take them to the cemetery. We would walk around the cemetery because it's the only place in the city that had tall, shady trees and irrigated green grass, apart from golf courses, which were not that friendly for walking around with babies. I just ached for the mountains. And so as I don't want to belabor this, but when I had an opportunity to come to Emory and Henry University for to be a visiting writer, things just kind of clicked into place. I met the person who became my husband, and I just found my way back home, and I never want to leave again. I mean, I still like to visit the world, but this is a place that's so important to sort of just my sense of well-being and my sense of who I am that I really love Appalachia.
Yeah, that's so great. That's reinforced by the recent book that we're quoting all the time, called The Rural Voter by Nick Jacobs and Dan Shea. And one of the many, many insights from that book is they talk about how rural people on the whole, I think it's even more true for Appalachian rural people, they are more attached to the place, even as they also feel like there's less opportunity and more problems. So yeah, there is something that really, really grabs you. Let's talk a little bit about Demon Copperhead, particularly the guy, Demon Copperhead. What a
Okay.
character. What a character. Such an incredible voice. I mean, I have a library copy, so I couldn't underline, but so many different great ways that he explains complex and difficult issues. But one of the things I get from him, he's going through all kinds of incredibly difficult stuff. First in his family, then in foster care, and yet throughout it all, he kind of he talks about it, but he kind of downplays it. He's incredibly resilient, and like so many rural people, he just is matter of fact about all the difficulties, the trials and tribulations. To me, that seems like such a common characteristic and such an important quality that a lot of rural folks have. I didn't know if you were trying to convey that, but I wanted you to talk about that.
Yeah, he doesn't, no matter what happens, it's like this is the deal you get. He doesn't victimize himself. He doesn't sort of attach victimhood to himself, which I think is really a notable characteristic of Appalachians. We've had the worst deal here, historically from all of these sort of extractive industries have just pulled out all the good stuff and left such a mess behind, so much institutional poverty. And still, Appalachian people, and I think rural people in general, are there's so much good um, in just the stories we tell, the ways we attach to our land, the ways we attach to our communities. And that's what I wanted to write about. Um, I think for my whole life, I've wanted to write the great Appalachian novel to tell this story, sort of this bigger story, not the bootstraps version that, I won't mention names, but um, some guy wrote a book explaining how hillbillies really deserve their fate, but he was really smart and went to Yale and pulled himself out of there. I didn't want to write that book. I wanted to write about the sort of the complex history of this place and what has been taken from us, but what's still here. The value and the nuanced sort of generosity of spirit that I really love. Not to mention this beautiful place that we have and the ways we connect with each other, that we are a people made of community. And so much of that is humor. That's what I grew up hearing, all my uncles telling these stories. And here's something, here's why I shouldn't even bring up that other book, but what I say about it is he's not really Appalachian because he aggrandizes himself. The way you know an Appalachian is that we are always the butt of our own jokes. This humility, this modesty, it's kind of like crazy like a fox kind of modesty, but it's just built into us. And there's some bad things about that too. I think especially for women, I grew up hearing like don't go parading yourself around, which imagine how that rings in my ears when I'm on a book tour. There's kind of a self-effacing property that you have to get past in some sense, but that fundamental modesty that connects us, that notion that we aren't bigger than the people who have supported us, who take care of us, that the tall weed gets cut, but also all the weeds really have a good reason to stay together. I just wanted to express all those things in that book.
You did it so well. I know the first time that I heard 45 or so years ago when I was in Appalachian, Kentucky, I heard somebody say about a neighbor's kid that he shouldn't get beyond his raising.
Yeah.
And I initially took that to be like sort of suppressing somebody who wants to do something grand or different. But the more I heard it, and the more I was in the area, I really came to see it the way you describe it. It's really just a sense of, there's a lot of people here of value and worth. Don't think you're so special. So
Well, yeah, it's there's such complexity to that because, it's really hard for a kid to leave and go away to college, because the family has good reason to believe that child will not come home because they will be trained into a profession that they can't pursue. This thing that happened in the latter half of the last century where mobility and following a job became much more important than family ties, where it's if people consider it the right thing to do. If you get a promotion and move to Denver, that's what you should do. That didn't really happen so much in rural places. We still have this sense of responsibility to stay, um, and it causes a lot of problems. And I think that's one of many things that me talk about, that urban people have trouble understanding about rural people. That we have there are a lot of conflicts about moving away,
yeah,
including for an education.
right. Yeah, yeah. So you've sold a few copies of Demon Copperhead, and you took some of the proceeds from the sales and put your money where your mouth is, as you are wont to do, by starting a women's recovery center called Higher Ground in Lee County. And Lee County, which, for those of you who don't know, Virginia is the westernmost county in the state. It's actually the western edge of it is further west than Detroit. But Lee County is kind of the epicenter of the book. Occasionally there's mentions of other places, but you turned around and invested in that. So tell us what Higher Ground is, how you got it going, and how it's going right now.
Okay. Lee County is it's just a couple counties away from over from here where I live, and it happens to have been one of the targeted counties by Purdue Pharma. It was the epicenter of the opioid um, um, cri crisis epidemic in this part of the world because Purdue Pharma really pushed hard to get to flood that place with OxyContin, and the consequence has have been devastating. And because the opioid epidemic was a big part of what I was writing about, the latest in the series of exploits of big corporations coming in to harvest whatever they can from us, most lately our pain. Um, I spent a lot of time over in Lee County talking with people about their own addiction journeys and recovery. I talked with people in in the medical fields, the recovery fields, and I just learned a whole lot about how hard things are for people in Lee County because even though these big settlements have happened and people imagine, oh, well, those millions or billions or whatever that Purdue Pharma gave up must have come back to the people who need it. They have not. That has not happened. There was not, and so yes, I sold a few million copies of Demon Copperhead, and so there was this windfall, which I don't need. I'm a farmer. I don't live high off the hog. Um, or if I do, it's my own hog. I always try, when money comes from a story, I try to use it to set the story straight. And so I thought this is a great opportunity to put a few $100,000 into Lee County where it's needed. So I got back with those people I had worked with and befriended in the recovery community and learned that what was most needed is recovery residences, places, safe places for people to live while they're getting on their feet from the moment of coming out of drug court or jail or whatever, trying to begin a new sober life without a job or transportation or education or often friends or family or anything. I mean, the recidivism rate is just it's inevitable unless you have some place to go, a community to support you while you acquire all of the skills and confidence you need to live, live a healthy, productive life. Recovery residences were the missing piece. There was not one recovery residence for women in Lee County, and I said, okay, I'll buy a house with a lot of rooms. Pulled together these friends I'd made, founded a nonprofit called Higher Ground Women's Recovery Residence. You can find our website online. It's HWGRR, Higher Ground Women's Recovery Residence.org. You can help us. You can find all kinds of ways of helping us out if you'd like to. But anyhow, we started this home. It immediately filled up. We need more. We need 10 more. We have bought the adjacent building. We're working on expanding. It's a beautiful project. One of the most um, gratifying things I've ever been involved with because, I had this hope if you build it, they will come. But also, I mean, so much more is needed. You start with a house, but you need support. You need, to furnish it. You need people to come and to put a new roof off and a roof on it and paint it and um, provide transportation and help with job support. And all of these things just came from the community. Church groups, community groups, all contributed. Of the downtown furniture store donated furniture for our living room. Different church groups adopted a bedroom and gave, quilts and lamps and things to hang on the wall. It was just, and it's still going on. And I mean, the needs continue, of course. Um, Not to say every need has been met, but it has been amazing to see people step up. I confess I had a little bit of a fear that there might be some sense of not in my backyard, that I don't want these, people, these people with opioid use disorder, no matter what they might be trying to do, I don't want them in my neighborhood. It was just the opposite. It was yes in my backyard every step of the way.
Mm, wow. Wow. And that must be that yes must have been across the ideological spectrum because I don't think there's enough liberals in Lee County to have just done it on their own. Tell us
Oh,
about that.
absolutely. Todd Pillion, my my Republican uh representative,
Hey,
stops me in the grocery store to chat about this project and wants to do everything he can to help. Actually, he told me he would like to get a copy of Demon Copperhead on the desk of everybody in the state house. He's to
wow.
all of these all It doesn't matter where you are on the political spectrum when you can agree that a need is great and people really believe in working together to try to meet that need, as I'm sure you've found in your community works. This is this is how we this is how we talk to each other across this divide, not by judging, not by saying, I need to convince you, I know something you don't, I am going to change you as a person. We have a conversation by saying, what do you need? What can we do together here that will make life better for all of us here? It has to be a conversation of equals. You have to bring humility to the table. I mean, I I was not about to march into Lee County and say, here's what you need, people. I went over there and called the friends I had who were in the recovery community, and said, let's all meet for breakfast at Denny's or someplace. And we sat around a big table and I said, I'm here to listen. You tell me, what does your community need? I didn't know. And I found out. And I said, how about if we start with a house, then what you tell me what else we need to do. Um, just people, people, people take information from sources they trust. And if you open a conversation with you idiot, it's over. It's over. And I mean, we all know that, but that judgment, that sense of I know something you don't, or I am more educated than you, I'm here to instruct you, it leaks out in all kinds of ways.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, you're singing from the Ruby hymnal with all of that for sure, Barbara. And the other thing that occurs to me, besides our tendency that many of us have on the left to kind of talk down to folks, the you idiot or you fool or you low information voter
Or
kind of
or
thing.
even if it's meant kindly, saying, let me just tell you,
Yes,
let me
right,
just, if you only knew what I knew, you would
right.
agree with me.
That's a
I mean, it doesn't have to, it doesn't have to be rude to
no.
be hurtful.
Most of the time it's not. Most of the time it's
Yeah.
more like the latter. And then the other piece is that often we're just by virtue of class or economic opportunity, we're also offering to help people in need, which is good, but
Yeah.
really different from offering to roll up your sleeves and work together, because that's much more like we're equals. And I
Yeah.
wonder, that's the whole essence of community works as it is with higher ground. But the critique we sometimes get is, well, that's good. That's great. You're out there working side by side and rebuilding trust, but we don't have time for that. With the stakes. What would you say back to that if people would say that?
It's the only thing we do have time for.
Hmm.
Um, um, understanding understanding the implicit power, imbalance in charity, in just that notion of helping people is so important, that nobody wants a handout. I mean, if people are surprised that this it's mostly communities that are dependent on Medicaid, like ours, like the where you and I live. If people far away are surprised that these communities voted for the government that is going to remove their Medicaid, they're missing something really important: the shame of accepting help, the shame of feeling like somehow you failed to get ahead and you need the government to come and save you. It's really hard to live with. It makes you angry, and it makes you want to hear from somebody who says, I'm not fancy, I'm not above you, I'm not, I'm the same as you. It's easy to it's easier to listen to that than to somebody who comes and says, I'm going to fix you and I'm going to save you and I'm going to give you a welfare check. It's just about respecting people's need to feel worthy.
Yeah, absolutely. I make puts me in mind of our mutual friend Wendell Berry, who said once long ago of people coming into places like Appalachia, we come with vision, but without sight.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people feel unseen. I've got one more question for you before we open it up, but I've got to read this. I loved, like again, I said I could read a million excerpts, but this is a spot fairly early on in the book when Demon has been put in foster care with this old exploitive farmer named Creaky, and Creaky's just working these boys to death. But yet Demon is reflecting on this, the fact they're working tobacco. And here's what he says: but you keep on, sun up to sundown in any weather, because if a farmer fails to get his crop in, he's lost it all: land, livestock, the roof over his head. For some, a lousy day's work will get you yelled at. For farmers, it's live or die. A tour of tobacco duty can feel like a season in hell, and you come back from it feeling like an army vet, proud, used up, messed up, wishing to be appreciated and invisible. Now, when I read that, I thought that I want to take that one part out of the whole book and plaster it all over the place, because I think there's so many, whether they're coal miners or farmers or loggers, who that would just totally relate to that. I relate to that in my little bit of farming. So I want you to kind of just expound on that a little bit, because it seems to me that's sort of the essence that the left is sometimes missing about this resentment that's arisen among hardworking rural folks.
Yeah, it's about feeling unseen. And I will maybe stray from your question a little bit to talk about sort of why specifically people feel unseen. Yeah, there's hard work, and I will also say, as I've said, I've said many times in my life, if you wonder why farmers tend to be conservative, think about what conservative means. It means you don't take big chances on something new, because as a farmer, if you take a chance on something new and it fails, you're, as Demon said, you don't get yelled at, you lose everything. You have to stick with what you know. You have to make changes gradually, based on with a kind of slow momentum, which is the definition of conservatism. So okay, so having some respect for that conservatism, having some respect for that incredibly hard work that feeds people, that repairs the roads and builds the cars and all of those things, um, specifically the rural things. The A lot of the reason for that invisibility is culture. I'm speaking as a cultural worker. The people I work with, I work in both literature and film, and all of the people I work with live in two cities, New York City and LA. Pretty much all of our popular culture, our movies, our television, and also our news media, all of it is made in cities. So when I go to these cities to try to sell a rural story. I'm trying to find a polite way to say how how that
Don't be
is.
polite. Don't be polite.
It's well, people think it's a niche market, and I want to say this is freaking half the country, and we don't ever see ourselves on television, in movies, in magazines, in stories, unless it's a joke, unless it's, the Beverly Hillbillies or Schitt's Creek, or,
Right.
unless it's something about how comically stupid we are. And people are so angry about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so angry. So a lot of this, and it's not like all of these problems, it's complicated and nuanced. I mean, we had a big grand opening celebration for the recovery residents, and a whole lot of national, we reached out to all the media, national media, as well as local, to ask if they would be interested in covering this story. And a lot of them said, oh, sure. What's the direct flight I can get to Pennington Gap? When they understood that it would take more than a whole day, there is no direct flight. It's at least two connecting flights plus a 4 hour drive minimum to get from New York to Pennington Gap. So it's a couple of days to get there, and to be there early enough and to do the interviews and then get home again, and to send to devote a whole crew, because they don't just send one person, they send a camera and a makeup person and all that. To send a whole crew to devote 5 days, 4 or 5 days, to getting this story, it's outside their budget. I mean,
Mm.
the
Mm.
saddest apologies we heard were from public media, because they were, what they were dealing with.
Right.
So they can't afford it. And that's where we are. It's nobody, it's not just, I mean, partly it's ignorance. I mean, you want to tell stories about the people, the things that seem important to you, and rural problems are not on the radar. But even if they are, even if something blows up and and really needs to be covered, it's hard, just because of it's a kind of baked in difficulty, because our media have become so centralized. So finding ways to tell rural stories, that's my life's work.
Mhm.
Trying to tell these stories, because people can't care about what they don't know.
Yeah. Very well put. Great. Well, we've just opened the chat, and we're opening it now to your questions and comments. I'm going to need some help because so many are coming in from Jean or Ariella, but I did snag a couple a little bit on the lighter side to start. One person who is knitting, as she's listening, asked if you knitted the sweater you're wearing.
Yes, I did. Thank you for noticing. Can you see? It's this, and also I will say that this is the wool of my own Icelandic sheep.
There you go. That's farm to, well, not table. What would you call that?
Farm to the shirt on my back.
Farm to the shirt on my back. That's right. And I also saw there were some questions about whether you plan, wasn't the word wasn't exactly a sequel, but do you think that you'll continue to write something akin to Demon, or do you feel like you kind of said it all?
I will never have said it all. I'm in the middle, hopefully past the middle. I'm writing another novel. I will confess it's not easy to answer a gazillion people who are saying, what's next after Demon? It's something very different from Demon, Copperhead, but it is, I mean, telling rural stories is what I will do till I die. And I'm particularly interested in class and um, art, and the barriers to rural and working class people that make it difficult for them to pursue careers in art, to become, for example, a writer or a classical musician, and why those kinds of art feel not just inaccessible to a lot of rural people, but almost like we're not allowed. We're not allowed in museums or concerts. That's like we're not welcome there. I'm very interested in that. I think it's very much related to um, the fact that a lot of kids don't feel like they should go to college because it will sort of put them into the enemy camp.
Yeah.
I'm really interested in those questions. So my next novel, which is about a musician from a little town in Appalachia, is exploring those same questions in a different way.
Oh, wow. Really interesting. And I'd say that sense that college might take you in the past, it was kind of to an alien camp. And then what the right has done with their attack on higher education and knowledge and science is that now it is kind of the enemy camp, whereas
Now
before
it
it was
is
alien.
the enemy camp,
Yeah.
and I'd like
Yeah.
to speak to that because I don't think that's one-sided. I would really encourage urban people to think about class in the same and segregation by class in the same way that they think about segregation by race because it's the meritocracy of education is so cooked in that it's really hard to slow down and doubt. Like we all want our kids to be precocious. Everybody, wants their kids to get into the best schools so they can get ahead. Well, ahead of what? Ahead of whom? Ahead of the people who don't have that opportunity. And if your kid is in fancy schools, they're going to grow up never even having any friend whose parents are janitors or any kind of shift workers. That is segregation. So that when they go to college and go into those professions, they don't know about shift work. They don't respect shift work because they don't even know about it. That is segregation and bigotry every bit as much as racial segregation and bigotry in terms of the way that it separates people's possibilities. People with a college education don't just tend to make more money, they live longer, they're healthier, they have, all of these things divide us. And it's so easy to think, well, I have this better life because I got this education because I'm a better person. I feel that. I it's I recognize that sort of satisfaction in people in a way that I makes me really get why there's why. I hear kids around here saying, I don't want to go to college. I don't want to
Yeah.
be that guy.
Yeah, yeah. And I just add to that also the sense that, to farm, to fix a tractor or a truck, to do an awful lot of things that rural people do takes not just skills, it takes knowledge. It takes thinking. And when you continuously hear that kind of work is, as Michael Bloomberg put it, doesn't take much gray matter, then it's kind of natural that you would resent the people who think that they have a monopoly on it.
Of course you do. Of course you do. And also that it's somehow, I mean, people say, well, I worked to put myself through college or whatever. Well, I did that, and I don't think I worked any harder than my high school classmates who spent those 4 years under a car rebuilding engines. And by the way, I couldn't rebuild an engine to save myself. I don't have that gray matter. So
Right.
there's a kind of disrespect that's at the heart of this resentment.
Yeah. So Ariella has been pulling together some questions from the chat and kind of combining them. So I'm going to go to some of them. First one is, what do you see as the similarities between the working conditions for rural and urban people? Because some people who are on the call who are from cities feel like what you're saying resonates with them as well. What do you think the commonalities are there?
Um, I mean, maybe the question isn't specific enough, but I do think, well, maybe I could go back to this sort of the bigotry of the educational meritocracy. I think probably janitors and shift workers in cities probably experience the same kind of sort of absence of respect. from the people who don't know how hard their jobs are because they have no acquaintance with them. I mean, I've even had conversations with people about, like, well, what kind of person has to go to work on Saturday? Like a lot of us, a lot of them. It's a little shocking to me how extremely separate these tracks have become.
Right, right, right. Yeah. Here's a question about actionable steps. So this
Okay.
person is asking, they're very excited to see what you're doing with Higher Ground. They're wondering what can they do to roll up their sleeves, not in Lee County per se, but where they are.
I mean, that's a question you have to answer. And the work has to come from inside the community. I think that's the one answer I can give. The community itself has to identify and describe the need before anybody else can do anything to help fix it.
Yeah. And I think that's a fair way to describe the community works approach. You gather together local people, and the first thing you do is start talking to people who work in food pantries and social services and nonprofits and figure out what the needs are. And then you just start putting together a group of people to actually start volunteering and increasing the capacity. So very much that approach starting at the community level.
And
Um,
but yeah, and you start with listening instead of talking.
Absolutely, absolutely. Another person asked, what would you recommend in terms of helping the foster care system wherever people are, or foster care
Boy,
families?
that's a question. I mean, like so many other things, so like so many other services in our country, it seems insane to me that the foster care system is run as a for-profit industry. So essentially, as Demon put it, we're product. Foster children are product. That makes no more sense to me than running hospitals for profit, than running medical care for profit, other things that should be fundamentally people's right. So I think actually there are legislations. I think just learning about it, I learned a lot. I didn't know before I wrote Demon Copperhead um, that that the whole system is fundamentally corrupt because it's run for profit, and it made me understand how easy, what a small step it is to become human trafficking, which is basically what some of the real bad foster parents in Demon Copperhead were doing, using these boys for work. And also getting paid to use these boys for work. So knowing about it, learning about it, I think that, they're probably, the systems vary from state to state. Our state has just made passed some legislations that are very positive in that direction, creating ombuds people to allow foster kids to make complaints directly. Um, without going through their foster. Now, also, there are wonderful foster parents, many very good people in that in that realm. The problem, like everything else in a rural community, is that the system is overwhelmed. Just like we don't have enough hospitals, we don't have enough doctors, we don't have enough healthcare workers, we don't have enough foster parents. The number of foster kids I won't get these numbers right, but the number of foster kids in our county jumped from like 7 to 107 in 2 years
Hmm.
because of the opioid crisis, because of this terrible disease that
Mhm.
took out, a generation of parents. So, like a huge proportion of kids, 20 to 30% of kids in some of these counties are being raised by people other than their parents. So when a system gets that overwhelmed, the people who are trying to oversee it couldn't, even if they have the best of intentions. Furthermore, like teachers, like anybody who works with children, foster people in the foster care system, the caseworkers are really, really poorly paid. They make basically poverty wages, so they don't stay in that job very long. They stay in it until they get another job. So the turnover is enormous. A caseworker for a foster kid is his legal guardian. So I didn't, this was all news to me. I didn't know this until I researched the book. So the caseworkers turn over so often that files get lost. People, kids get, they fall between the cracks. I mean, their cases literally, their files fall down behind the desk. It's not uncommon for a child in the system not to know the name of his legal guardian.
Hmm.
So that's a system that's broken and everything about it needs to be fixed, starting with just paying these people better.
Right, right. A couple of people have talked about concern that having these kinds of conversations, whether the setting is Appalachia or other rural communities, might get reduced to stereotypes, that rural areas have rich people too, rural areas have a diversity of people. How do you talk about it, whether you're writing or speaking, in a way that kind of avoids making big categorizations or stereotypes?
Well, that's easy. I'm starting I mean, stereotypes are the starting point. All I've heard my whole life is the stereotype. I mean,
Hmm.
when I left Kentucky and went to college in Indiana, that hotbed of high culture, people stopped me on the sidewalk to laugh at how I said hair or oil or steel or whatever. I mean, people ask me, "Oh, you're wearing shoes and it's not Sunday. Isn't that funny? Ha ha." I mean, I've lived my entire life with the stereotype that we are one kind of person, stupid, backward, bigoted, unambitious, all of those things. So I figure anything I say to generate some sense of nuance is a step in the right direction. What's really interesting to me and what I work, I think about all the time and work on, sort of the picture I work on painting in when I write about these communities, is that we are people made of community. We are ecosystems of people, which means there are all kinds of people. And when I wrote Demon Copperhead, I made sure that there were wealthy people there. There were, there were the caretakers, there the grant, like there's a lot of, I mean, there's kind of like certain kinds of people that you're always going to find, like the mema who's looking out for all the kids on the, up and down the hollow, who makes sure that the ones that aren't getting enough to eat get, invited in for a meal on Sunday. There's the papa who's gonna, who's gonna show the boys how to fish and how to field dress a deer. There are these people, these different kind of categories of people, the cagey ones, the shy ones, the funny ones, that I know from my own my own life here and my own childhood. And I try to fit all that together. And also, we are even like racially and in terms of background, we are not a monoculture. That's another thing to sort of that's news to people. We are not all white in Appalachia.
Right.
Um, we are all kinds of people. So I just make sure that all kinds of people are in my stories.
That's great. That's great. It reminds me, and I've been here a long time, and I'd like to think I don't do a whole lot of oversimplifying, but when back in March of 2018, when I was running for Congress, I was out cutting wood one day on a new spot, and there was a young man came by, and he was going to be cutting wood too. He's a big old boy, and so the two of us went to cutting wood and working hard. And after a while, we stopped and introduced ourselves to each other. And he was talking about that he had to get back home because he had to make sure his daughter, who I think was 16-ish, um, was studying hard. And he said, because, and this was a surprise to me. He said, because I want to make sure that she doesn't live under the thumb of some man. And here's this big
Okay.
old fella with his chainsaw and working hard, and I thought, daggone, he's a feminist. Yeah, it's a real
Yeah.
surprise. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're getting some questions from folks about higher ground and not about the particulars, but what kind of has been some of your real learning moments or stories you've heard or surprises just by through the process of developing it and now helping to operate it. What have you learned that you weren't expecting?
Um, I mean, there a lot of the challenges are just what you expect in Appalachia, in any, I'm sorry, in any rural place. Transportation. We ask that every resident um, has a job or does volunteer work. That's a requirement for living in this house. And fortunately, the house is in Pennington Gap, so it's walking distance from a couple of from an Arby's. From there's some fast food. Some of the women have fast food jobs that they can walk to. Um, but the options are very, very limited because of transportation. We have no public transportation, and pretty much anywhere in rural America, and and how people have we've had actually donors offer to donate a vehicle to the house, but that doesn't solve the problem because these are women who don't have driver's licenses, or it's just, or if they do, it's just one vehicle, and we'd have to cover, insurance, and we can't really afford a vehicle, or to hire a driver to do everything. So, we put together um, different community services that offer transportation, but it's a huge stumbling block. But the local community college has been wonderful in offering tuition-free courses. um, I think I'm going to say that what has surprised me is are the positives. How helpful so many people, how creatively so many people have come forth to try to help us solve these problems and put together um, just different pieces that we need to help these women get on their feet and live productive lives.
Fantastic. One person says that your description of addiction is so right on, and they're wondering if Demon Copperhead is modeled on a particular person that you've come to know, or how did you arrive at a character that seemed to have such an understanding of all this?
No, not one person. And that's probably the assumption that I encounter most as a fiction writer. People always think that every character is based on somebody. Never, ever, ever. Not me, not anybody I know. Because I construct worlds and I construct plots, and I need to populate them with characters who will do exactly what I need them to do. And the people I know are not that cooperative. I have to invent characters who have the backgrounds and the motivations to do these specific things I tell them. So what I did in the case of, I mean, I'm really fortunate that I've never struggled with addiction. And while there is some of that in my in my extended family, like every family, I've never been, intimately connected enough with the process to know, really basic things like, here's a pill. How do you get it into your veins? I don't know what the steps are. I had to learn a lot of, all those things, including horrible, scary things. So I just spent lots and lots of time with lots of people listening. Just, will you tell me your story? I was so fortunate to meet and make friends with Dr. Art Van Zee, who runs who's in the clinic in St. Charles, whose practice is mainly treatment of people in recovery. And he was the one to say to me, "You're going to need to talk with a whole lot of people in addiction and recovery." And he very kindly um, sent an email to his patients asking if anybody would be willing to talk with me, and several people did come forward, and from one person I met another person, but I just spent lots of time sitting with people, hearing their stories, and I was so moved by how forthcoming they were.
Mm,
They would say, "What do you want to know? I will tell you the awfulest things that I've ever done, that have ever happened to me, as well as the things that I'm glad about. The things that moved me towards recovery."
mm, mhm,
And I think what I realized was that these were people who had not had a chance to tell their stories. They had not been heard. Um, so that's something I really wanted to do in this book, is help people. I mean, it's a good book can be both a window and a mirror. I wanted it to be a window for people outside this region to see us in a more um, interesting and complex, sort of a nuanced light, to dispel the stereotypes and maybe generate some respect for rural people. But I also wanted it to be a mirror for people to see themselves. And I've gotten the most touching letters from people who grew up in the foster care system, for people who have lost, loved ones to addiction, for people who are in recovery themselves, to say to me, "I feel seen." Um, that's if I can do that for people, I feel like I'm, 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 uh, I'm, I'm worth my shelf space on the planet.
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
earning it.
yeah. Great. I've got a couple of questions about kind of rural more broadly. Well, first is just a little comment that a person on the call who's from Wales and has family in rural Italy is reflecting on the fact that so much of what you're saying really seems to be universal. It's resonating with them from their experience in Wales and Italy. Then we have a question from somebody who is in the Southwest in Arizona, where the rural communities are far more Latino than here in Appalachia. And they're wondering if you have any insight about some of what the rural Latino population is facing in Arizona, different or similar to the kinds of things that you brought up in Appalachia and Demon.
Well, I don't know because I haven't lived there for a long time, so I'm not, I don't really have my finger on the pulse of what problems are right now, although I can guess that there's a lot of fear of insecurity because of ICE, because of the extremely inhumane um, use of force in taking people into custody, um, and just the way people are being treated, whether they even citizens have to be afraid if they they can be profiled. What this is doing to rural farming communities in the Southwest, I can only imagine, and it breaks my heart. What I know from the time I lived there years ago, when I worked with the sanctuary movement, which just basically helped people survive who had come illegally over the border um, in order to escape usually torture and death in countries in Central America and farther south in Chile, because of the war, uh, because of the US support of those dictatorships, which were persecuting people. That was my big education. Wow, my country is making their countries dangerous and inhospitable for these people. But when they come and try to cross the border to be safe here, they're not safe either. So I got involved in a movement just to put water in the desert so that people wouldn't die, to try to help people move people into safety. So I know there's a long, long history of churches, church-based and politically based movements, organizations that help people find safety. And I know that those are still in existence. um, it's it's kind of another set of problems when you don't even know from one day to the next if you're going to be sent into exile.
Right, right, right. Thank you. Well, we're a little bit after 5. You have graciously agreed to go a bit longer. I want to mention to folks once more that this wonderful, wonderful session with Barbara is part of the Rural Urban Bridge Initiative's monthly briefing. We've been doing it now for over 3 years. And I do want to highlight next month's briefing on December 3rd. It's pretty interesting. It's a gentleman from the Center for American Progress who will be talking about a new strategy to essentially make Citizens United irrelevant. They call it the Montana Way because they're going to launch it in Montana, hopefully in 2026. I won't go into the details except to say that it bypasses all the things that the courts keep overturning in terms of corporations are people and money is speech and all that awful stuff. And it goes to the fact that states charter corporations and as such have a tremendous amount of control on what they can and cannot do if they choose to exercise it. So put it on your calendar, everybody. It's going to be a fascinating thing. Wouldn't it be amazing if we started a state level movement to make Citizens United irrelevant? So keep that in mind. That's a pretty cool thing. But again, we're delighted to have it. We've got just a couple more questions for Barbara here before we wrap up. There's a really good question about how we talk about class, but I'm probably going to end with that. So in the meantime, a couple of maybe more softball questions. One is people have asked what you're now reading, and also are there other rural authors that you recommend to folks?
Well, okay. Well, I think you've probably talked about Arlie Hochschild's book,
Mhm.
um, the Pride Paradox. No, please tell me the title of it.
Yeah,
Pride.
gosh, it's slipping out of my mind.
Ah, I hate that. I'm a
Me
deer in
too.
the headlights when it comes to book titles. Anyway, a wonderful, wonderful book by Arlie Huck.
Stolen Pride, Stolen
Stolen
Pride.
Pride. Thank you.
Michelle,
About the
thanks.
it's a really good analysis of this problem of how this feeling of shame, which all goes back to, the American dream of I should be able to take care of my family, and when I can't, there's something wrong with me, and how damaging that is, and how kind of leads to this sense that somebody's stolen something from me and I need to get it back. It kind of generates animosity between um, different kinds of people. Anyway, it's a great book. Fiction wise, well, gosh, I mean, Appalachian writers, I could just go on and on. Silas House, I love. Wendell Berry. Let me see. Here we all are. Um, Louise Erdrich, just her most recent book called The Mighty Red
Hmm.
is looks at a lot of these problems or these same issues, these rural kind of touchstones of rural troubles and passions in where she lives, Minnesota, in the area around Minneapolis and St. Paul on the beet farmers. I really really liked that book, The Mighty Red. Um, gosh, I want to like do a footnote and give you a long long list. It's really
Yeah.
hard.
Well,
I
you can if you want to, because just to say to everybody who attended, as well as those who registered but couldn't attend, you will within a few days get this recording, so you can
okay.
listen again or share with family and friends. And you will also get a few links to Ruby. And if Barbara thinks of some other great Appalachian or rural authors and shares them with us, we'll put them in that as well, probably before week's end. So plenty of opportunity for that. All right, well, let's close up with this question. It kind of gets to the meat of it. And again, I I sort of feel like Demon does it pretty well. But the a person commented that one of our biggest problems in this country is we don't know how to talk about class.
Mhm.
And you early on in this conversation were absolutely talking about class and the relations to race and class. How do you think? What's your kind of advice about how to more effectively talk about class?
Just acknowledge that it's there. Think about it as real. I think that we are so brainwashed. It really gets back to what I was just talking about before, the this notion of the American dream, the meritocracy, the idea that we don't have class in America, that the playing field is level, that anybody here can get ahead if you work hard enough and if you're smart, you can get ahead. What that does and and of course we all acknowledge that isn't true, and I think that at least among progressive people we have acknowledged that that is not true with respect to gender, with respect to race. There are built-in hurdles that 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 make the playing field not level. We have structural, institutional problems handed down that make it harder for some people to not even prosper, but just to, to make ends meet, to have a healthy, productive life. Harder for some people than others, that we don't all start in the same place, but somehow this we don't accept the same thing, the same truth about class. That if you come from a family um, that has of people who have never had a college education, um, it's going to be just about impossible for you to get one. If you come from a place that has no public transportation, it's going to be really hard for you to have piano lessons as a kid. Like there are just these things that are built in um, that keep people in, sort of in a class, sort of horizontally, that interfere with what we imagine to be this steady, continuously available upward motion. So I just say try to obliterate that 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 little voice that says I deserve what I have. Like if I'm doing well,
Mhm.
I there's something. It's so easy to say, well, but I worked hard to have what I had, and so I must have worked harder than somebody else. Uh-uh, not necessarily. I mean, yes, you may have worked very hard to have what you have, just like you might have, worked hard to have good health. Um, but that was also luck.
Yeah.
And it did not necessarily come, it was not necessarily generated entirely by yourself. It was generated by circumstances which you inherited. Um, and likewise, if you're not prospering, if you are struggling to make ends meet, it's not because you're not smart and not working hard. And these presumptions are everywhere. They are insidious. To recognize them in ourselves and others and call them out is what we can do.
That's excellent. That's a great way to wrap up. And I'll mention to folks again, if you go to the Ruby website, we have some resources. We have a wonderful publication that Erica Edelson primarily wrote called Talk Like a Neighbor. And a lot of that is about just being respectful and talking across class and across ideology. So, Barbara, this has been amazing. We've got, I think, approximately 1 million thank yous and praise in the chat. I'm going to quote Chris Evans, a friend from Pound, Virginia, who says, "Thank you so much. I feel like I've been to church." So,
Well, I do too. And I thank you, Anthony, for inviting me here. And I thank all of you who are watching for caring about this and wanting to do something about it. I appreciate you.
Yeah, right back at you. Thanks again to everybody. Thank you so much to Barbara, and hopefully we'll see a number of you next month as well. Take care.
Bye
Bye
bye.
bye.